Story time about how my boyfriend broke up with me to marry my mother. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Yes, my boyfriend actually did marry my mom. A little backstory on him. He and I had been dating for 6 months. We decided we wanted to move in together, but neither of us had a job. So we ended up moving in with my mother. A little backstory on my mom. Her and I never got along when I was growing up. I mean, it would get to the point where we would throw hands. Every single week she had a new boyfriend. Most of the time her boyfriends would come live with us and she would pay for everything. She even asked me to get a job so that I could help support her and her boyfriend. I started working at a restaurant. And yeah, I helped her pay for bills. I would even buy her boyfriend his beer. When I got accepted into college, I decided I would move out. After that, I barely spoke to my mom. Fast forward to when my boyfriend and I move in with her. She would wear lingerie around the house and constantly flirt with my boyfriend. I had to tell her on several occasions to cover up and just leave him alone. But here's the thing, it never bothered my boyfriend. In fact, he would flirt back. I thought he was just joking. Until a few months passed and he breaks up with me. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my boyfriend broke up with me to marry my mother. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said in part 1, we moved into my mom's house and she was wearing lingerie all the time. And she would constantly flirt with my boyfriend. My boyfriend was having a really hard time finding a job, but luckily I found a job. So I started working as a personal assistant. The problem is that as a personal assistant, you have to be on call almost 24/7. So I was usually never home, and sometimes when I would get home, I'd have to go right back out. This allowed for my mom and my boyfriend to spend a lot of time together by themselves. I would come home and they would be watching movies on the couch together. My mom would always cook him dinner. And then I started finding out stuff. For example, I found out they went to the movies together and they didn't invite me. I only found out because my boyfriend used our joint bank account to pay for the tickets. Sometimes they would order food for themselves and not even offer me any. And they would have beach days. They were spending way too much time together. At first I thought this was good because it meant they got along. But the more my mom dressed provocatively, the more I realized she was trying to seduce him. Then my boyfriend breaks up with me and tells me that I should move out because him and my mom fell in love. Part 3 of how my boyfriend broke up with me to marry my mother. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So one day my boyfriend breaks up with me and tells me that I should move out. And when I asked him why, he said that him and my mother fell in love. But since I was already suspecting something, it didn't really surprise me. But of course I was still devastated. That's when he asked me if I could move out that same night. Mind you, I don't have any money or even a place to go to. That's when I run over to my mom's room and guess what? She had locked herself inside. The coward didn't even want to face her own daughter. She told me that the best thing for everyone was for me to move out and that she knew I could get back up on my feet. So I grabbed some of my stuff and I went over to my best friend's house. My best friend invited me to live with her, thank God. A few weeks later, my mom invites me to her wedding with my boyfriend. Or ex, I should say. Last I heard, she's doing OnlyFans, and my ex is living off of her. I have a better job, I'm thriving, and have my own apartment. Story time about how I got bullied my last year of high school by the most popular girl. Okay, so this is my story time. A lot of you requested one, but I'm also at the airport, so sorry for any noise. So most of my high school years were spent in Nicaragua, except for my last year of high school. You see, I booked a show in Miami, so I had to move to the US. I was also doing modeling, commercials, and a lot of radio. I enrolled in the local high school, and it was like literally culture shock for me. I had never experienced an American high school, American parties, or even like actually mingled with American kids. I was really shocked to see how like adult they were. For example, boys and girls were doing adult things. I was constantly being invited to parties where people were drinking, but I never actually went. So the most popular girl in school decided to befriend me in quotation marks. By the way, there were so many times where I spent lunch in the bathroom like Caddy from Mean Girls. It was like Mean Girls, but real life. So this popular girl, she was also a model, and we kind of bonded over that. But behind my back, she had a bet to see which boy would take me to prom. She wanted to see how far this boy could get with me, if you know what I mean. Part 2 might not be up, sorry. Part 2 of how I got bullied by the most popular girl in school. This is my story time. So this popular girl who befriended me had a bet with boys to see which one would take me to prom. Specifically because she wanted to see how far they would get with me on prom night, if you know what I mean. I kept saying no to every single boy. Because I was the new girl, I was constantly getting hit on, but a lot of these boys had girlfriends. Well, since I said no to every single boy, this mean girl decided to print out flyers of the show that I was in. So basically the poster of the show. And when I got to school the next day, there were so many posters of me on the walls, on the floor, with a lot of things drawn on my face. They were even in the boys' locker room. Then someone made up the rumor that I did that because supposedly I wanted everyone to know that I was a working actress. I was really embarrassed, but at the same time, I kind of thought it was funny. And this really upset the popular girl. So she decided to take it a step further. She invited me to her house one day, and because I thought she was my friend, I decided to go. She cooked me pasta and we talked for a while. Then 2 boys show up. She told me one of them would be my prom date. Part 3 of how I got bullied by the most popular girl in school. This is my story, by the way. So I'm at the popular girl's house, and suddenly 2 boys show up and she says one of them was my date. That's when I told her that I did not want to date for prom. And then the boy asked to speak to me. I talked to him and I told him that I definitely did not want to go on a date with him and that I didn't even know him. That's when he told me that my friend had set everything up, and she told him that I liked him a lot. Well, I told him that that was not true, and I basically went home. A few days later, she started a rumor saying that I was totally in love with her and that I forced her to kiss me. Yeah, she's crazy. That's when people started calling me horrible names. But the joke's on her because I was so used to getting bullied in Nicaragua. After school one day, she comes up to me and starts telling me why she doesn't like me. She was so angry she started to cry. She said that she was the pretty girl and then she was the model in school. I literally just walked away from her. I went to prom with no date, which was so fun. I graduated and then I kept working. Guess who slid into my DMs a few weeks ago asking to hang out? That's right, the popular girl. I think she must have seen my TikTok or something. Should I actually go out with her and tell her what I think? Or should I just leave her on red? You guys decide. Story time about how I hooked up with my boyfriend's dad. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My boyfriend's dad is an absolute DILF. He used to be a competitive bodybuilder and even did some modeling back in the day. Well, let's just say my boyfriend didn't turn out with the same looks. Don't get me wrong, my boyfriend is really sweet, but he's not the best looking guy. One of the reasons we started dating and I really liked him was because of how considerate and loving he was. We started off as friends and he would take me out to dinner, wine and dine me, eventually asked me to be his girlfriend and I said yes. We both come from wealthy families, and our families loved the idea of us being together. Exactly a year ago, we moved in together, and he got a new job that required him to travel a lot. Well, he asked his dad to come check on me. So his dad would come over, we would watch movies, and just hang out. But one night we decided to do some drinking. I got super tipsy, and so did he. One thing led to another, and we ended up, And after that, we did it over and over. Of course, my boyfriend's dad felt super guilty, and so did I. I mean, he was cheating on his wife with me, and I was cheating on his son with him. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I hooked up with my boyfriend's dad. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. After my boyfriend's dad and I had hooked up a couple of times, of course, he felt really guilty, and so did I. We decided to end things cordially and never tell anyone about it. Fast forward to when my boyfriend comes home from his work trip. I had to pretend like nothing happened, but it was really hard because at this point I definitely caught feelings for my boyfriend's dad. I became really distant from my boyfriend and he started noticing. He also asked me one day if his dad came over to check up on me, which I said yes. After that, things were just not the same between my boyfriend and I. He would always ask me why I never touched him or kissed him, and I would just say that I felt bad or that I had my period. A month later, my boyfriend goes on another work trip. My boyfriend even invited me to come on the work trip, but I said no. Instead, as soon as he left, I called his dad and told him to come over. I told him I just wanted to talk, but really, his dad came over, we talked for about an hour, and then it happened again. It's like we just couldn't help ourselves. That's when he told me that he was catching feelings for me and that maybe even wanted to get a divorce. Part 3 is Part 3 of how I hooked up with my boyfriend's dad. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sent to me on Instagram. My boyfriend's dad tells me that he wants to get a divorce from his wife because he's catching feelings for me. He even suggested that we could move away to another town. And yes, at this point, I had totally fallen for him too. But at the same time, I still had a relationship with his son. But to be honest with you guys, I didn't have the guts to tell my boyfriend that I loved his dad. Since my boyfriend was still on the work trip, his dad would come over almost every single day. His wife, aka my mother-in-law, didn't even notice that she was coming over to my place. She thought he was at work and at the gym. We are now fully in love. My boyfriend came back from his work trip and of course, I was still distant. A few days later, he asked me what was wrong and I just don't know what to tell him. His dad told me to keep quiet for now because he wants to figure out what to do. I don't want to end a marriage and I know I don't want to break my boyfriend's heart. But at the same time, I am in love with his dad. I know you guys are going to think I'm a terrible person, but I genuinely need your advice. What do you guys think I should do? Should I be honest with my boyfriend? Story time about how I cheated on my husband, lied about getting pregnant, and left with all his money. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. Oh, this is gonna be a good one, you guys. A little background, my husband and I met 2 years ago. And lucky for me, he's a wealthy plastic surgeon. So a little backstory. I actually met him because I wanted to get a nose job. I made an appointment in his office and I went. We actually hit it off right away, even though he's older than me and, wasn't the best looking. After the appointment, I decided I would get the nose job. A few days later, I get a phone call. Guess who it is? It's the wealthy plastic surgeon who I just saw. He asked me out on a date and I said yes, of course. By the way, at the time I was a sugar baby, so I had a few sugar daddies. I figured he would just become another sugar daddy. He took me out to the best restaurant in town, and you better believe I ordered the most expensive thing on the menu. After my surgery, he would bring me food and was just really nice. Then he asked me to be his girlfriend and I decided to give him a chance. I even broke up with 2 sugar daddies to make space for him. That's when I asked my boyfriend for an allowance. He said of course. There's so much more to the story. Part 2 is up. Part 2 about how I cheated on my husband, lied about being pregnant, oh yeah, and stole all of his money. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. This was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said in part 1, I had asked him for an allowance. Of course he said yes and offered me $3,000 a month. I accepted even though it was on the low end. By the way, I still had 1 sugar daddy at this time. Oh, and I forgot to mention, I was pretty obsessed with the Kardashians. My goal in life is to look like Kim K. So now that I had a plastic surgeon boyfriend, I decided to ask him what other surgeries he thinks I could do. I already had my nose job. Now I definitely wanted to do some other stuff on my body. But when I told him, he got really upset. He said I didn't need to change anything about me and that I needed to stop looking for attention from other men. That's when I told him that would be totally impossible and that I definitely was going to keep my other sugar daddy. He totally flips out because he didn't know I had a sugar daddy. Then he asked me if I was actually in love with him. I told him that love would grow eventually, but that I really did like him. Then he started playing hard to get, like he wanted me to apologize and beg him, but I was not the type. So we ended up not speaking for a few weeks. Eventually he comes over to my apartment and asks me what surgeries I want to get done. And back to the surgery table I went. Part 3 is up. Part 3 about how I cheated on my husband, lied about being pregnant, oh yeah, and stole all of his money. Well, almost all of it. Disclaimer, this is not my story time, it was sent to me on Instagram. So my plastic surgeon boyfriend decides to do more plastic surgery on me. But this time, it was free. We decided to get my bum done. Again, during the healing process, he was a total angel and brought me food and took care of me. Yeah, he was also paying for all of my bills and my rent at this time, even though I still had a sugar daddy. And he knew it. A few months passed and he asked me to go to Italy with him. Of course I said yes. We stayed at a beautiful place in Tuscany and then he asked me to marry him. He had planned out this whole romantic dinner and of course I had to say yes. But on one condition, that I let go of my last sugar daddy. So I told him I would, although I actually did not. So we started planning my dream wedding. We finally got married and I moved into his mansion. Then he told me that I had to get pregnant right away. His excuse is that he's in his 50s and he really wants to have kids. I said I wanted to have a baby too, but I kept taking the pill. I mean, I am just not ready to have kids or to ruin my beautiful body. This is when my other sugar daddy started getting really annoyed because I never spent time with him. It was really hard being torn between two men. Part 4 is up. Part 4 about how I cheated on my husband, lied about being pregnant, and stole all of his money. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said, my sugar daddy was starting to get really annoyed at me because I never spent enough time with him. That's when I broke it to him that I was actually married. He totally flipped out, called me a user, cut me off, and blocked me from everything. So that meant I was not getting money from this sugar daddy at all. It meant I was totally dependent on my husband. Remember I said my husband wanted me to get pregnant? Well, I kept taking the pill because I didn't want to get pregnant. But my husband would ask me every single day how that was going. And I was like, it's going. I even started lying, saying that I was going to go to the baby doctor just to get myself checked, and I really wouldn't. Instead, I would go have lunch and shop. Around this time, an old sugar daddy of mine contacted me, who I still had a crush on. He was like super good looking. He offered me some money and asked me if I wanted to go on a few dates, so of course I said yes. I accepted because I really wanted to just separate myself financially from my husband. I didn't want to be dependent on him all the time. So when my husband was at work, I would go out on dates with this new sugar daddy. The sugar daddy wanted me to go on a trip with him, and I had to say no. He got really upset and started asking questions. Of course, I didn't tell him that I was married, but he started getting really suspicious. He also started to catch feelings really quick. Like he always wanted to be with me. He would text me all the time. And that's when my husband finds a text message from the sugar daddy. I basically denied everything and I told him that I no longer had any sugar daddies, but my husband did not believe me. That's when he calls my sugar daddy from my phone and tells him to leave me alone. And the sugar daddy told him that only I could make that decision. So I basically had to cut off the sugar daddy right in front of my husband. My husband was like really angry at this time. So I was on my best behavior for the next few weeks. But after a few weeks, he was still really angry. So I realized I needed to start taking money out of the account that he gave me. So I started transferring money from his account to my account. And then from my account to another account at a different bank. And guess what? My husband did not notice one bit. He had several other accounts and investments and all this other stuff, so he never really noticed if anything went missing from that one account. After a few months, I had $50,000 in that bank account. I knew it wasn't enough, so I had to start taking more money out. And then a few months after that, I was at $120,000. I knew this was enough to get me a little house somewhere and just like basically live by myself. That's when I devised a whole plan. I would leave the country and buy myself a house. I even started looking for a real estate agent in other countries. But then the poo hit the fan. My husband found my pills and asked me if I was actually trying to get pregnant or not. Once again, I started lying and I told him that of course I wanted to have a baby with him. Then he insisted we go to the doctor together. That's when he found out that I had not gone to the doctor once. He told me that if I didn't want kids, we would have to get a divorce, so I told him that I didn't want kids. That's when I told him I wanted a divorce and that I only wanted half of his stuff. He started laughing in my face and left. I knew I had to act quick because it was a matter of time before he found out I stole all that money. The very next day, I booked a flight and left. He started blowing up my phone, asking me where I was, calling me. Then he started threatening me for taking all the money in the bank account and that he hired private investigators to find me. Now I'm considering going back to him, but I honestly don't know what to do. I got myself a cute little house and even found a new sugar daddy. But I know he's still looking for me. What should I do, you guys? I think I really messed up, you guys. Story time about how I'm hopelessly in love with my boss and I'm about to be a homewrecker, but help me! Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So I've been working for my boss for 3 months. He's in the tech world and he makes lots of money and he hired me as a personal assistant. He's got a wife and 3 kids. They've been married for 15 years, and he's 18 years older than I am. One day my friend told me that this guy was looking for a personal assistant and I applied for the job. I had my first interview and right away I was super attracted to him and I could tell that he was attracted to me. Like, you know, when you like someone and, you know, there's just a vibe between you guys. He then called me in for a second interview, and in this interview, we basically spoke about everything he would want me to do and what the job entailed. I mostly had to run his schedule and set up meetings for him with clients and different things like that. So it's not like I was getting him his laundry or running errands for him. A few days later, he calls me and tells me that I got the job. He offered me a lot of money, more than it was advertised at the beginning when I went for the interview. So I took the job. But here's the thing. From the time I did my first interview, I had not stopped thinking about this man. Like, I already had feelings for him before I even started working for him. So I decided to dress really cute for my first day, and he noticed. I mean, I was playing this man like a fiddle. My goal was to get him to fall for me. After the first week, he asked me to go to lunch with him to celebrate the fact that I had been doing a good job. Of course, I said yes. Went to this beautiful restaurant and had wine. We then went back to his office and I went home. Later on, he sends me a text message saying that he's so proud of me for doing such a good job. Fast forward a few weeks, I kept flirting, he kept flirting back. Finally, at the end of the month, we went to another lunch. This is when he opened up to me and told me that he was attracted to me. I told him I was attracted to him too. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I'm hopelessly in love with my boss and I'm about to be a homewrecker, so I need your guys' help. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. After my first month of working there, he took me out to lunch and decided to tell me that he was attracted to me. So of course I confessed to him that I was attracted to him as well. I mean, duh, it was so obvious. At this point, I had done everything in my power to make him fall in love with me. I wore the cutest outfits, always did my hair and makeup. If I went to Starbucks, I would always get him a drink as well. And I would even bring him home-cooked meals sometimes. So in other words, I went out of my way to make him see that I am totally wifey material. And yes, I was always aware that he was married and had kids, but he didn't look happy with his wife. She never came to the office, and they never spent any time together. And according to him, she had an affair last year, and he's pretty sure that she's back with the guy that she was having an affair with. First, I didn't know whether to believe him or not, but then he showed me screenshots of messages that she had sent to this guy. That's when he asked me if I wanted to go have lunch again. Then he asked me to go to the movies, and we made out the entire time. So I'm sitting there making out with my boss. That's when he tells me that we have to keep this hush-hush, because if the company finds out, he will be in major trouble and so will I. But he's a high earner in the company, so he can't be messing around. This would ruin his life. Ever since the first kiss, he basically treats me like his work girlfriend. And every day for lunch, we go out to a restaurant just to get to know each other. It's the only time we have together. About a week ago, he asked me if I would be willing to marry him if he divorced his wife. I said yes right away, but honestly, I'm not sure if I want him to leave his wife for me. And his kids. I never thought of myself as a homewrecker. Well, because I said yes, he said that we should try to find a way to tell his wife. I don't even want to meet this woman. And he wants both of us to talk to her. I told him we should wait at least a few months before we do that. That's when he got me a new apartment. That way, when he leaves his wife, he's already got a place to stay. And of course, he wants to live with me right away. It's a luxury apartment and I love it. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how I'm hopelessly in love with my boss and I'm about to be a homewrecker. So yes, I need your guys' help. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So now that he got me my new luxury apartment, which I'm totally in love with. By the way, I have a sauna in my shower. He wants us to plan out how we're going to tell his wife. Like I said in part 2, I don't know if I want him to leave his wife for me. I mean, I see a future with him, but do I really want him to leave his wife and his kids for me? He even wants to start planning the wedding. He wants to move in together right away, plan the wedding, and get married. He promises me that his kids will love me and that his wife won't have a problem because she's already having an affair with someone else. But I feel like that's just him being hopeful and it's really not going to be that easy. So I opened up to my family and I told them what's going on. My mom told me that as long as he leaves his wife and everything is good with the kids, then we should feel free to be together. But ultimately, she doesn't want me to be a homewrecker. I definitely feel like things are going way too fast. I mean, tomorrow we're gonna go taste a bunch of cakes at a really nice bakery. Oh yeah, and he even took me shopping for a wedding ring. He wants to buy me one that's $40,000. It's 3.2 carats. So unfortunately, now that I told my family, a few cousins found out what was happening. And one of my cousins reached out to my ex. She told him what was happening and he called me to ask me not to marry this guy. He says we can work on our relationship. But let me tell you, this ex was totally toxic. He would monitor everything I would do. He never let me have friends, and he didn't even allow me to have Instagram. Oh yeah, and he's kind of broke. I mean, I was the one paying for most of the stuff in the relationship, so I don't even know if I want to open that can of worms again. But part of me thinks he's right. Like, I shouldn't be rushing into this. But on the other hand, I found myself a wonderful man. He's so loving, caring, so generous, and he's actually super fun to be with too. I've never felt more secure in a relationship before, and I know that most women would love to be with him too. What do you guys think I should do? Embarrassing story time about how I was catfished for 3 years. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. I'm a super shy person. I have such a hard time talking to guys. So one day my friend suggested I do online dating. So I went home and I signed up to a bunch of dating apps. This is when I started meeting a bunch of guys online. And it was much easier to speak to them through there than in person. So one day I get a message from this really cute guy. He asked me for my Instagram and we started messaging each other through there. His profile was full of pictures of him traveling with his dog and his family. He had a Range Rover and even said he was a doctor. Like, literally my dream man. After a few weeks, I was completely head over heels in love. And he told me he felt the same way. But we had never even had a phone conversation. That's when I asked him if we could talk on the phone. He told me he was in surgeries all day, so he would have to reschedule. I believed it. He then ghosted me for a full week. When he came back, he apologized and said he's been really busy. So I decided to call him. And you won't believe what happened next. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how I got catfished for 3 years. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said in part 1, he ghosted me for a full week. When he came back, he said he was just busy. So I called him, and a man with a strange accent answered on the other side. He told me that my boyfriend left his phone in the bathroom and that he happened to find it. And I believed it. A few hours later, I get a message from my online boyfriend saying that he's sorry he missed my call. He said he was really busy for the rest of the week, so he wouldn't be able to talk on the phone. I was so in love that I just believed everything he said, which I know is so stupid. After that, we just messaged each other through WhatsApp for months. Then I asked him to send me some pictures, and he basically sent me screenshots of his Instagram pictures. So I asked him to send me a selfie. Obviously, I wasn't suspecting anything, but I just wanted to see his face. So he sent me a really bad quality picture, and I couldn't really even make out the face. That's when he said the camera on his phone wasn't working, which is why he sent me screenshots of Instagram. Again, I believed it. A few days later, he asked me for money, and when I asked him why, he said he was short on funds. So I sent him $3,000. Then he sent a really angry message saying I should have sent more. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how I got catfished for 3 years. Claim this is not my story time. It's sent to me on Instagram. So I sent him $3,000. A few hours later, I get an angry message from him saying that I should have sent more money. He even called me the B word. I was super heartbroken because I couldn't believe he was talking to me like that. So like an idiot, I apologized and sent $2,000 more. So in total, I'd given him $5,000. I asked him again what he needed the money for, and he said that his money was tied up in investments. A few days later, he apologized and told me the money came through. Before I knew it, almost 3 years had passed. He kept using COVID as an excuse not to be able to travel to see me. And yes, he did ask me for more money, so in total I had sent him about $20,000. A month ago, I told him that for my birthday, I wanted to go see him. That's when he sent me a message saying that I was too much and he couldn't handle the relationship anymore. I called him again and the same weird voice answered. That's when he told me that he had been lying to me this whole time, and he was actually a 70-year-old French man. He told me to leave him alone and hung up. I'm totally heartbroken, and I have no way of getting that money back. What should I do? Story time about how my crazy friend told me that she's attracted to me and I eventually had to block her. And yeah, she's a girl. And yes, this is my own story time. Oh yeah, and by the way, my makeup collab with Au Natural dropped today, so please click the link in my bio. I am so proud of it, and it is super affordable makeup. So back in 2016, I was living in LA by myself. I was pretty much on set every single week and I auditioned almost every day. So I was meeting tons of people and actors at that time. And I was making lots of friends. During one of these auditions, I met this girl, let's call her Jess. Jess was super cute and funny and she made me laugh a lot. After the audition, she asked me if I wanted to share an Uber with her, which I thought was really sweet. But when we got into the Uber, she was asking me so many questions. Like, this girl wanted to know everything about me. Finally, we exchanged phone numbers, and when I got home, she sent me a text. She asked me to go out with her and her friends. I had so much work the next day, I told her no. That's when she calls me really angry, telling me that I need to live my life. You'll never guess what she said. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my friend told me she was attracted to me and I eventually had to block her. If you haven't heard, I dropped my first makeup collab today with Au Natural. Please click the link in my bio to shop. It's super affordable makeup and I'm so proud of it. So she calls me on the phone after I told her I didn't want to go out, and she starts yelling at me. She says that I needed to live my life. Then she said, "Give me your address, I'm coming over right now to pick you up." That's when I was honest with her and I told her that she's putting a lot of pressure on me and that I barely even know her. Then she kind of backed off because she heard my tone of voice, and she told me that she was a very intuitive person, that she could tell that I was holding something back. I told her we could hang out that weekend and she said fine. Then she proceeded to text me every single day. Really thought we were building a friendship, so we talked about a lot of stuff. And I was finally happy to have a real girlfriend. At least I thought. Finally, the weekend comes around. But I get my period. My periods are pretty bad, so I told her that I wouldn't be able to go out. Again, she calls me super angry. She said I needed to man up and basically take drugs, like the green stuff. I sort of laughed on the phone and this made her even more angry. That's when she hung up. But then she calls me right back. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how my crazy friend told me she was attracted to me and eventually I had to block her. By the way, the blue pigment is for my collab with Au Natural, so please go click the link in bio to shop. Super affordable. So after she hung up on me, she calls me right back. That's when I told her that she was being really strange and I just didn't like it. She apologized and begged me to come out. Finally, I said yes because she was just being so annoying. So I go out with her and her friends for a few hours. Then I literally had to beg her to let me go home. Throughout the night, she kept holding my hand and kissing it. Another 2 weeks passed by and we just kept texting, but I definitely knew that I was not going to go out with her again. But of course she invites me out again. That's when I told her that I didn't really think our friendship would work out. 30 minutes later, she tells me to look out my window. Yep, she showed up to my apartment. Then she told me that I was confused, as in I didn't know if I liked men or women. I told her I definitely like guys. She told me she just wanted to take me out on one date. I asked her how she found out where I lived, and she said she followed me from the Uber that first time. I blocked her and ran inside, haven't spoken to her since. Story time about how my dad and I caught my boyfriend and his wife cheating on us in a tent. So luckily this is not my real mom. This is my stepmom. Her and my dad married a few years ago. So my family and my boyfriend's family are pretty close. My boyfriend's parents and my parents, aka my stepmom and my dad, get along with his parents. A little backstory on my stepmom. After my dad and my mom got divorced, he met her and they started dating pretty quickly. And they got married after only 5 months of having dated. So she becomes my stepmom, but she never really made any effort to get to know me. And I never really liked her. Like, she gave me a weird feeling. So my boyfriend and his family asked us to go on a camping trip one time. And my dad and I didn't really want to go because we never really go out. But my stepmom was super keen on going and she finally convinced us to go, so we ended up going. I mean, in the back of my mind, I was like, wait, why do you want to go to this camping trip so much? We finally get there and set up our camping tents. That's when my dear stepmom says that she doesn't want me and my boyfriend sleeping in the same tent just in case we try to do something. In other words, she didn't want him and I to do the dirty. Why? Because she was hoping that my boyfriend and her would do the dirty. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my dad and I caught my boyfriend and his wife doing the dirty, literally right next to us. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said in part 1, my stepmom said that my boyfriend and I couldn't sleep in the same tent because she didn't want us doing anything. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that during this time, my stepmom and my dad were always fighting and they were totally ignoring each other, so they couldn't sleep in the same tent. So basically, my dad and I were sleeping in the same tent. My stepmom was in another tent. We all go to bed and everyone's asleep. That's when I started hearing like the noise of plants ruffling. I ignored it and I went back to sleep. But then I heard some giggling coming from the tent. So I start walking over to my boyfriend's tent because that's where all the giggling is coming from. I was trying not to be heard. And as I started getting closer to the tent, I tripped over and fell into the tent. That's when both my stepmom and my boyfriend start screaming. And I see them sitting naked in the tent. That's when my boyfriend started lying, saying that she forgot something in his tent and that's why she was there. And it gets worse. My dad wakes up and hears all the commotion. He comes over to find his wife and my boyfriend naked. Part 3 of how my dad and I caught his wife and my boyfriend doing the dirty right next to us. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said in part 2, I fall into the tent and catch my boyfriend naked with my stepmom in it. That's when my dad comes over and sees them both naked. And my dad just started going nuts. He started yelling at my stepmom. My dad was so hurt. I was too, but I was also in shock from seeing my stepmom naked. I couldn't believe that my boyfriend had been hooking up with my stepmom all this time. And like right under my dad's and my nose. That's when my dad and I were just yelling at them. But then my dad called an Uber and we went home. He went straight to his lawyer and filed for divorce. But of course, my stepmom didn't want to sign the divorce papers, so it took really long for my dad to finally get divorced from that witch. Oh yeah, and I haven't spoken to my ex ever since the day I caught him naked with my stepmom. I never even got an apology, not one from him. Time for shoutouts. I will be choosing one person from my live to give a shout out to in my next story time. So today's shout out is for Cindy_the_tree. Another story time is coming the day after tomorrow. Bye. Part 3 of how my dad and I caught his wife and my boyfriend doing the dirty right next to us. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So like I said in part 2, I fall into the tent and catch my boyfriend naked with my stepmom in it. That's when my dad comes over and sees them both naked. And my dad just started going nuts. He started yelling at my stepmom. My dad was so hurt. I was too, but I was also in shock from seeing my stepmom naked. I couldn't believe that my boyfriend had been hooking up with my stepmom all this time. And like right under my dad's and my nose. That's when my dad and I were just yelling at them. But then my dad called an Uber and we went home. He went straight to his lawyer and filed for divorce. But of course, my stepmom didn't want to sign the divorce papers, so it took really long for my dad to finally get divorced from that witch. Oh yeah, and I haven't spoken to my ex ever since the day I caught him naked with my stepmom. I never even got an apology, not one from him. Time for shoutouts. I will be choosing one person from my live to give a shout out to in my next story time. So today's shout out is for Cindy_the_tree. Another story time is coming the day after tomorrow. Bye. Part 2 of how I ended up with 2 sugar daddies I met at the trip club. Now I basically have to choose between one of them. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. So this other guy comes into the club and asks me if I want to be a sugar baby. I immediately said yes. This man owned several businesses and everyone knew him around town. A week into our arrangement, he started becoming really jealous. He was constantly asking me if I had a boyfriend or if I had other sugar daddies. Of course I said no. That's when I realized I had to hide everything from both of these guys. Luckily, the second sugar daddy traveled a lot. He would FaceTime me all the time and even asked me to turn on my location. The only reason I put up with it was because he was giving me $7,000 a month. That's when sugar daddy number 1 asked me to quit the club again. And I basically said yes because I was getting enough money. I didn't realize it then, but he basically took that as me saying that I wanted to be in a relationship with him. That's when he started wanting to come over to my place all the time and basically spend every single day with me. So I would tell him I was going to the gym, but really I was going to go see my other sugar daddy. Then sugar daddy number 2 asked me if I wanted to move into a better apartment, and he became my co-signer. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how I ended up with 2 sugar daddies and I had to choose between one of them. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sent to me on Instagram. So sugar daddy number 2 offers me an apartment and wants to be my co-signer. And the apartment was so beautiful. It was 2 bedrooms, had a washer dryer inside the unit. It even had a doorman and a pool and everything. It was a huge step up from the place I had. This is when sugar daddy number 1 started getting really suspicious. He asked me how I could afford it. Then I broke the news to him that I had a second sugar daddy. He freaked out and told me I needed to choose between him or the other guy. I can't tell sugar daddy number 2 because he's super jealous, but my gut tells me to go with sugar daddy number 2. He pays me more money and gave me the apartment, but number 1 is super nice. But number 2 travels all the time, so I don't have to see him all the time. I don't know. What do you guys think I should do? I love my new apartment though. What do I do? Part 3 of how I ended up with 2 sugar daddies and I had to choose between one of them. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sent to me on Instagram. So sugar daddy number 2 offers me an apartment and wants to be my co-signer. And the apartment was so beautiful. It was 2 bedrooms, had a washer dryer inside the unit. It even had a doorman and a pool and everything. It was a huge step up from the place I had. This is when sugar daddy number 1 started getting really suspicious. He asked me how I could afford it. Then I broke the news to him that I had a second sugar daddy. He freaked out and told me I needed to choose between him or the other guy. I can't tell sugar daddy number 2 because he's super jealous, but my gut tells me to go with sugar daddy number 2. He pays me more money and gave me the apartment, but number 1 is super nice. But number 2 travels all the time, so I don't have to see him all the time. I don't know. What do you guys think I should do? I love my new apartment though. What do I do?